Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Let's get chatting. You know who Captain Dan is and you know what we're up to. We want to get professional. We want to get adults on board. We want to form a fist to take this information to the next level. It's a very stressful time, we understand. The date here is the 2nd of April, 2020. We're in the middle of the coronavirus, which is either the most We're just going to carry on. There's obviously some very bad things happening in the world right now, but I say let's keep a happy face as much as we can, and let's just keep moving forward. The end may not be nigh, but I'm sure there's going to be some trouble, but let's just keep moving forward as fast as we can. You've seen who Captain Dan Hanley is in the introduction, so we might as well just move forward, and Captain Dan is going to give you some details, particularly his intimate knowledge of Boeing aircraft. His last aircraft, as you know, was the 777, and he's the man besides Phil McConnell who has really pushed this issue of Boeing and the uninterruptible autopilot, which is so important to understand. And of course, Dov Zakheim and his company based in the Pentagon, and we all know good old if Rabbi Dov Zakheim, although there is some controversy whether he really is an Orthodox rabbi, but Mr. Dov Zakheim, of course, as you know in the introduction, the comptroller for the Pentagon and so on, a very interesting person. And myself and Dan and Tim at abledanger.blogspot.com are, of course, working closely together. We don't agree on absolutely everything, but we basically get along and we all understand we better get a fist happening. We better get the adults together and start integrating and talking with interesting people. Because if we don't get this information to interesting people, then we're just going to be online, scattered all over the place, clicking links, sending links to each other and saying how horrible it is. And of course, you saw in the introduction, Adam Curtis saying this is exactly what they're trying to do.
The Liberals were outraged by Trump, but they expressed their anger in cyberspace, so it had no effect. Because the algorithms made sure that they only spoke to people who already agreed with them.
So please, I'm going to hand it over to Captain Dan Hanley. Dan, it's great speaking with you. Please take off. Tell us who you are again in detail.
Okay. Well, I'm a U.S. citizen married to a Pakistani. I'm coming to you from Islamabad, Pakistan, where I've lived for 10 years. People have accused me of hiding out here, which I'm not. I'm happily married. I'm happily married and very happy with my wife and her family over here. She's a news anchor with PTV World, which is the largest TV station in Pakistan, but it's a state-run TV channel, and I've been trying to get on there for an interview without success. But anyhow, people don't know about me, so I'll give you a little bit of background information on me. I commenced flying over 50 years ago in 1968, first as a civilian pilot flying a small Cessna aircraft, such as the one we'll see the alleged Muslim hijackers flew to train to fly the Boeing 757, 767. I got my private license, my commercial, my instrument, and my multi-engine rating by 1970. Then I went on to receive an applied math degree at Southern Illinois University. And when I got out, the Vietnam War was still raging. And rather than get drafted, and I'd spent a lot of money, I worked my way through school. I decided I was going to go into naval aviation. So I got into flying the P-3 Orion aircraft, and for people that don't know what kind of aircraft that is, it's a 4-engine turboprop. And during the 70s, we tracked Soviet submarines during the Cold War. And over a cumulative period of 10 years, I did some reserve time flying the airplane. That's what I flew in the Navy. But in 1978, I was hired by United Airlines as a pilot. And over the next 25 years, I flew about 7 different aircraft. I could get into that a little bit later, maybe. But in 2002, 2003, I began reporting to the company holes in the aviation safety and security system, among other issues. At that time, I didn't believe these poorly trained pilots could have flown the aircraft, but I wasn't reporting that at the time. Long story short, I was forced into an illegal and wrongful early retirement 11 years prior to my mandatory retirement age of 65 in December 2003. So over a career span of 35 years, I flew 15 different type of aircraft, accumulating over 20,000 flight hours. Now, I'll start off with my statement, but we've got a lot of people coming in behind me that'll make a similar statement that I'm about to make now, and that has to do with I'm talking about other highly qualified and experienced airline, military, and civilian pilots. But I'll tell you right now, with all my flight experience, I can unequivocally state that I could not possibly have flown the 9/11 flight profile, and in particular the Pentagon profile, which we'll discuss a little bit later, at the speeds and altitudes and flying the spectacular aerial maneuvers performed by the alleged hijackers. Furthermore, I don't believe that these poorly trained and highly inexperienced hijackers could have possibly been in control of the aircraft that day, as they had never flown the very complex and highly sophisticated 757 and 767 aircraft. Well, it's my assertion right now, along with other people that are in our organization that I'll talk about in a few minutes, there's over 290,000 pilots in the world, and we believe that they will agree with the assertion I just made. Regarding the organization that I am the director of, and also the international public spokesperson of sorts for, we got a website, and it's at 911pilots.org, and I'll repeat that throughout because we want not just pilots to come to our website, but the general public as well, to educate them on the information there that is essentially contained within 4 or 5 pages. It doesn't look like very much reading, but there's a wealth of material on the website.
Dan, could I just
Yes.
break in here just very briefly?
Yeah.
I hope the general public will understand that this is what we're trying to do. Don't get me wrong, we still want members of the public to support us in whatever capacity you can. Don't get me wrong, we've met a lot of grassroots, highly intelligent people who, some are in wheelchairs, some are veterans, some are pensioners, and they're doing their bit. But what we're trying to do is also expand that subculture off the internet ghetto into the professionalized ranks of people like pilots, whether military, ex-military, serving or not, in whatever capacity, and of course airline pilots. And
Right.
by doing so, particularly with, as much as the corona scare is obviously quite frightening to a lot of people, particularly with families and mortgages to pay, if we can, this sudden realization that this year is a big year. I think, as you stated, Dan, a lot of pilots, and you have 500 or more pilots on your LinkedIn list you're in touch with, and they're just too terrified. Could you just go on and maybe extrapolate on the fact that pilots now may well be at a point where they've got nothing to lose? And do you feel that this coronavirus may well mean we could get people who would previously be very tentative about joining with us? Do you think this is a good opportunity?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because initially I thought all I was going to get was retired airline or military pilots, and I wound up getting both retired. They were military and airline pilots, but now we're starting to see active pilots trickle in every day as we expand readership on the website. So yes, I agree with you that people normally airline pilots, they look around and see what happened to me or Field McConnell, who was, I'll talk about him a little bit later, but they try to medically ground him as well. They're reluctant to speak out because they're sitting in this high-paid job, relatively cush job, and they don't want to upset the apple cart. They've got mortgages to pay, car payments, etc., overhead expenses. So they're reluctant to speak out. But in the current environment, I think we're going to see more and more of them come forward as we go on. So you're right. I think that they will come out and talk about join us in our crusade here. It's purely grassroots and it's global, and we like the numbers we're seeing right now, but we need more to drive more people to 911pilots.org so they can read the information there. But Brendon, if you like, I'd like to walk people through the pages of the website because I can cover important points that we're going to discuss here today and just give them an overview of what's on the website so they come to it and read up in detail what we have there for them.
Yeah, please go ahead, Dan.
Oh, okay. Well, if you go to 911pilots.org, the first thing that pops up is our home screen, and welcomes you to 911pilots.org. The second slide shows terrified people in New York on 9/11 looking up at the towers as they're coming down, and we're demanding the truth about 9/11. And this pretty much summarizes the goals of our group. We said injustice for the world. And then we asked the question, could unskilled pilots do this? And it's a picture of United 175 hitting the second tower and blowing out the other side. And the last slide is a picture of a cockpit saying highly skilled pilots couldn't. And that's the whole thrust of what this website's all about. We're saying that the unskilled pilots couldn't have flown the profiles, and we're trying to get pilots to come in and agree with it. So if you scroll down from the slideshow, it says who I am and that we're trying to get these highly trained and experienced civilian military airline pilots, whether they're active or retired from around the world, and that's what's coming in right now, who would be willing to examine available evidence in this website because 9/11 occurred almost 20 years ago, and they don't know flight numbers, they don't know the profiles, they don't know anything about the uninterruptible autopilot or the experience level of the hijackers, and that's what we're starting to introduce, and not just pilots to, but the general public. But we're asking them from around the world who would be willing to examine the available evidence that we have and testify before a committee on camera via Skype or some medium like that, or in person before a committee, as to the difficulty of the maneuvers supposedly performed by these 19 Muslim hijackers on 9/11, such that even highly trained pilots could not have flown the profiles on that day. We're looking for experienced pilots to give us input in identifying the skills and aptitudes which pilot must master and distinguishing them from persons who lack such training. We give an example, and this is a good one because this is the smoking gun of 9/11, and that is of a Muslim hijacker, Hani Hanjour, and we'll profile him later about regarding his experience. But he was a pilot who supposedly piloted American Airlines Flight 77 that allegedly struck the Pentagon on 9/11. Now the profile goes like this. The aircraft was reported to have conducted a descending, accelerating 330-degree corkscrew turn from 7,000 feet just west of the Pentagon to arrive precisely at ground level to strike the Office of Naval Intelligence at nearly 500 miles per hour, which incidentally also housed auditors who were conducting an investigation, which we'll talk about later. But a friend of mine, Rusty Amer, who I consider to be the most qualified pilot in the world, he got in a simulator with a young private pilot. He had flown in a private aircraft before, and they tried to replicate this maneuver I just described in the simulator. And every single time he tried it, he crashed the airplane. And yet, according to the official narrative, Hani Hanjour accomplished this amazing feat on his first attempt with minimal aircraft experience, training in light Cessna aircraft, and only having a few hundred hours of total flight time. And we've got a video on there. I know it's laughable, really. We've got a video on there where Rob Balsamo, the co-founder of a group called Pilots for 9/11 Truth, is being interviewed by Jesse and Ventura, the former governor of Wisconsin. And he goes through Hani Hanjour's training or lack thereof, and then they cover the simulator where this poor young pilot crashes it every time. Now, before I go on,
well, let's cut, Dan. Let's cut to that footage now, just for a second.
American Airlines Flight 77.
Now, I can't really go on without talking about another international grassroots group because it will explain where we're going with our program here. And that's a group you've probably never heard of because they're not making mainstream media in the United States, nor are other studies that have come forth since then. They're getting no coverage whatsoever, but it's called the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. And what they did was get with the biggest 9/11 whistleblower organizations or individuals in the world and compiled all this information, presented it to the Lawyers Committee, and the Lawyers Committee petitioned the New York U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Jeffrey Berman, and requesting that he convene a grand jury. Well, a couple months later, they came in with 57 evidence packages from these numerous organizations, which included architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, scientists for 9/11 Truth, firemen that were at the scene that heard explosions before the buildings came down, and other people with 57 evidence packages. And once they presented them to the U.S. Attorney, he had no recourse but to convene a grand jury investigation, which we can talk about a little bit later if you want. But their contention is that World Trade Center buildings 1, 2, and 7, and yes, there was a third tower that came down on 9/11, building 7, also known as the Salomon Brothers building. They're saying that their evidence conclusively proves, using the scientific method, that the collapse of these 3 buildings was due to controlled demolition and not because of jet aircraft impact, building damage, or the jet fuel fires that ensued. So the goal is to achieve a Department of Justice criminal investigation into the events of 9/11, because most people say, well, wait a minute, you already had the 9/11 Commission. That was not a criminal investigation. All the evidence was hauled off to China. All the steel was hauled off to China.
Isn't that interesting, Dan? It was all hauled off to China. Sometimes I think there's some people cooperating with China behind the scenes somewhere along the line.
Well, like dual U.S.-Israeli Deputy Attorney General Michael Chertoff ordered the steel to be hauled off without any forensic evidence being taken by the FBI, which is unprecedented.
And Dan, we all know who's very good friends with Israel, don't we?
Yes, we do. But I'm happy to report that 9/11 pilot whistleblowers has very recently begun communicating with the Lawyers Committee. As a matter of fact, a few weeks ago, I had a 45-minute conference call with 4 members of the board, architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth founder Richard Gage, their head lawyer, Dave Meiswinkle. He's the head of the committee, and then their chief litigation officers, Mick Harrison and one other lady. And I explained to them that we're attempting to gather this testimony from around the world. Well, they explained to me, we cannot legally represent you at this point in time because we got to remain objective. So if you can present evidence to us, and we can vet these pilots to where they know what questions or how to answer questions before grand jury, and we'll move forward from there. So that's what we're doing. We're trying to collect affidavits from pilots around the world. We've already got it set up. We've already got a mailing system set up to send out to them. And I'll get to the Join Us page here in a minute. But
Dan, could I just interrupt just to extrapolate for people, just so they understand? There's going to be people who will say things like, "Oh, what's the point? There's no point interacting with the government. We know they're corrupt." Yes, we know. The point is, number one, ethically and morally and legally, you have to go through official channels first. You walk and chew gum. We do official channels. We also do unofficial channels. And I'd just like to remind viewers who think 9/11 is still irrelevant, I sort of understand it's been done to death. Nothing's changed. Why is that? Well, we've gone into that, Adam Curtis. We're just clicking links around the place. No one is engaging properly with government departments. We have no faith in our government departments anymore. The vast majority of the employees are good, honest people with mortgages and kids just like you. They're going to die just like us. They're going to catch corona possibly just like us. So that's not the problem. The problem are people like Dave Frasca. Dave Frasca was the head of the Muslim fundamentalist unit for the FBI. And Dave Frasca, one guy, just one guy, Dan, I'm not sure if you're aware with this, but Dave Frasca was the one named by 5 separate FBI investigations into the Venice flying circus, as Daniel Hopsicker would call it. Muhammad Atta and the gang were learning to fly, and 5 separate investigations were quashed.
Lead story in the Washington Post: FBI was warned about Moussaoui. An FBI agent who interrogated Zacarias Moussaoui before 9/11, 2001, warned his supervisors more than 70 times that Moussaoui was a terrorist and spelled out his suspicions that the al-Qaeda operative was plotting to hijack an airplane. According to federal court testimony yesterday, Agent Harry Samet told jurors at Moussaui's death penalty trial that his efforts to secure a warrant to search Moussaui's belongings were frustrated at every turn by FBI officials he accused of criminal negligence. Samet said he sought help from a colleague, writing that he was so desperate to get into Moussaui's computer, "I'll take anything."
By one man. So you had 5 very honest, decent FBI agent groups saying, oi, there's something going on in Venice, Florida at these flight schools. And one guy, Dave Frasca, and you're going to be hard to find a lot of information on him, quash those investigations. So I just want to get across to people, engaging with official people, even if you don't get the immediate public response you so desire, a thumbs up, a click, a thank you, a parade, you are injecting, like the coronavirus, we're injecting the truth coronavirus into those departments, and they talk, and I know this firsthand, and I don't want to interrupt too much, Dan, but I just think it's important to get across to people, this sort of official adult engagement is necessary. We can walk and we can chew gum. We can do both official and unofficial grassroots. Dan, I don't want to interrupt too much, but I thought that was very important to raise.
Please do. Anything you have to say, just jump in and I'll shut up here. But this will be a true test of the U.S. justice system. And for those of you who aren't familiar with grand jury investigations, in this case, they convene 23 jurists, and the U.S. attorney his assistant presents evidence to them. And this jury has super subpoena power. They can request the U.S. attorney to bring anyone in before them and for questioning. And we're hoping that people like Dobbs Ockheim or Larry Silverstein, et cetera, once evidence is presented, are brought before the grand jury. But they're very secretive. They're conducted in secret, and that jurors can't talk to one another outside the room. If you testify as a witness before the grand jury, you're not even allowed to say that. So where the status of the Lawyers Committee case is right now, we do not know because they're secretive. And the Lawyers Committee is getting ready to sue the Justice Department because it doesn't appear this grand jury is moving forward after a few months here. But the Justice Department right now is hiding behind a law saying we don't have to provide you with proof that we're conducting this thing. So we're going to follow with them, hoping we'll get a grand jury investigation and get these pilots before the jurists saying we couldn't have flown the airplanes themselves. So that's pretty much what we're doing. That's pretty much sums it up. There's
Dan, could we just reiterate? Is it your opinion? And I've never actually asked you this directly before. As someone with 30 years flight experience on small and large 4-engine turboprops and jet turbines, is it your opinion? And you tell me, it's not just unlikely that these men couldn't have flown these aircraft at all, let alone flown them a few feet off the ground or into a tall building. You're saying it is literally impossible for them to have done this.
Yes, because we'll get into the speeds later, but the speeds at which they were flying exceeded what's called a never exceed speed by 120 to 140 miles an hour. I'll use miles per hour instead of knots, but in that instance, the plane itself would have come apart. We've got engineers looking at how that they got this off radar data, how they could possibly be flying these 57s and 67s that fast, but it is impossible that these pilots perform these maneuvers. And we're going to have highly experienced pilots, like one of the guys I have is a Pakistani who has 50 years flight experience. He's still training his student pilots. He was a wing commander in the Pakistan Air Force, and he went to join Pakistan International Airlines and worked his way up to 747 captain. And I had a program called 9/11 Pilot Whistleblower that he co-hosted. When I asked him the question, Hadi, could you have flown the profile? He laughed at me. He says, of course I could. and they couldn't either. So that's the response we're getting from people here. So if you're not just a pilot, but if you're a member of the general public, we've got a click here on the home page, but also if you go to the top of the page, it says join us. And when you do that, when you click on that, it takes you to a page, and we made it super simple to fill out just because people they look at forms and don't like to fill it out. It asks for your first name, last name, email address, the country you live in, so we can get the country code in case we want to call you, your phone number, and then there's a comments box at the bottom where the general public we've been noticing are making comments regarding what we're doing. But for pilots, we're asking them that they fill in their aircraft type, how many hours they've flown, and their background experience, so we can vet them. But we're also looking for aircraft mechanics, engineers, etc., because we'll pass your names on to the lawyers committee, because they're also investigating what happened with United 93 over in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, what happened, whether or not these airplanes could have performed these maneuvers. So if you're an engineer or a mechanic of sorts, like Paul is, I just talked to this morning, he's going to contact the lawyers committee. So the bottom line is this: why are we doing this? Because millions of people have been killed, maimed, and are displaced from their homelands as a direct result of these horrific crimes of 9/11, and we're demanding that justice be served and bringing those responsible to a court of justice through a thorough criminal investigation by the U.S. Department of Justice. So if you go up to the top of the website page, there's a drop-down menu, and the first thing you see is our motto, which is, quote, patriotism and freedom of speech and action. And it plays a nice national anthem song there with American flags. But we believe what we're doing is patriotic, and we still believe we have a First Amendment freedom of speech rights, that we're speaking out when we see something wrong with our government. And we also have the second page of the drop-down menu is a memorial to the 8 pilots and 26 flight attendants who lost their lives on September 2001, and we got a picture of them there saying, may they rest in peace. But these next 4 pages we get into here. The first one, you look at photos of a Cessna 172 cockpit, which was the primary flight training aircraft of the 9/11 hijackers. Now, what I want to point out here, when you're looking at them, is note the instruments are the old round dial instruments that I even trained on this type of aircraft with the round dials back when I started flying in the late 60s. And the co-pilot side doesn't even have any, and there's a few knobs on the bottom that you'll notice was a throttle and the mixture and a few other knobs. But then we contrast that with the photo of the cockpit of the 767. So the 757 and 767 are very similar in cockpit design. So when you look at it, 57 looks about the same. And the first thing you notice is a conglomeration of knobs, dials, switches, instrumentation. And the instrumentation you're looking at there is a CRT display, and there's a wealth of information on there. But the primary navigation system for this aircraft are the 2 flight management computers you see on the center console there. They wouldn't have a clue, number one, what they were looking at on the instruments, and number 2, how to operate the flight management computers for navigation. And yet we're asked to believe that these guys who had never seen this cockpit, never had any training on it, were able to hop up in the cockpit, slit the pilot's throat, pull them out of the seat, jump in there and able to fly them at the profiles that they did. And then we ask at the bottom, do you notice any subtle differences? So the second page on there are the hijackers themselves. And again, we reiterate that they only trained in light single engine aircraft. A few had some multi-engine time, but most didn't have more than probably about 250, 300 hours. And we emphasize that they were able to hit their targets at 400 to 500 knots on the first attempt. So we didn't profile the 2 that hit the tires that much because not a lot can be said. As a matter of fact, American Flight 11 that allegedly hit the North Tower, the first plane to hit, he was a guy named Mohammed Atta. He was an Egyptian, and he was supposedly the ringleader for the hijackers. Age 33, commenced flying in June 2000, about 15 months before 9/11, and he got his commercial and instrument rating, and he hit the tower supposedly at 465 miles per hour. The flight path was basically a straight-in approach from the north into the tower at an incredible speed, but the only indications we have that an airplane actually hit the tower was the, I don't know if I'll pronounce it as the Claudette brothers or Claudette brothers were filming a
Yes, I think it's
documentary.
Claude. Yeah.
Claudette brothers.
Yeah.
They
We
swung their
forgot those.
camera.
We forgot those lucky Frenchmen who are in the right place at the right time. I
Hey.
mean, synchronicity does happen. Divine providence does happen. But it is a little suspicious. But yeah, the Norday. I think it's Norday brothers.
Okay, Norday,
with that
that's
famous,
it. Okay.
that famous
Yeah.
footage. If they hadn't been there, we would have literally no footage of the first aircraft hitting.
Right. So here's the analogy that I didn't come up with this originally. Someone else told it to me, and I agree with them. But the precision required, the execution to execute the maneuver performed to hit the North Tower is equivalent to jumping in a large semi-tractor trailer truck, having never driven it before, accelerating it to over 500 miles per hour, and driving it through a Jiffy Lube without scraping the sides of the truck and without ever having driven it before. So the whole scenario is absurd. That's how precise he would have had to been to hit the thing. The second hijacker, his name is Marwan al-Shehi. He's from the UAE. He was the pilot on the United.
Dan, could I just interject
ahead.
1 second more?
Yeah.
Muhammad Atta, people forget, Muhammad Atta's best friends weren't fellow Arab Muslims, they were Germans. Daniel Hopsicker from Mad Cow Productions did an excellent video. He was a former NBC producer, an old hand, a really old hand, who went down to Venice and interviewed people. He was the first to break the fact that Muhammad Atta was a cocaine addict who hung out at strip clubs. Daniel Hopsicker interviewed Muhammad Atta's girlfriend, who he strangled cats in front of her. He was obviously half a loon, probably a typical drug addict cocaine behavior, which would explain Muhammad Atta's 1,000-yard stare people talk about. That can come about with cocaine abuse. And his friends were all Germans. People forget this. And he spent a lot of time, I believe it was at Hanover, Germany. I can't remember exactly where he spent time. But it was in Germany for about 6 years. People forget this. And there's a great interview with Daniel Hopsicker with Muhammad Atta's girlfriend, where they were traveling around doing drugs and drinking, and they were very close, very best friends. And I just think people should remember the German angle that we've all forgotten. So please, Dan, back to you.
Okay. Well, this Marwan al-Shehi was the hijacker for United 175 that allegedly hit the 767 that hit the South Tower. He was only 23 years of age. He commenced flying in June 2000, just like Atta did. He got his commercial license, and to get a commercial license, well, back in the 60s, you only needed about 250 hours if you were going to an FAA-approved school. But he was the fastest airplane. He was doing 590 miles per hour. Now, he approached the South Tower from the south in a descending left-hand turn, accelerating to this 590 miles per hour. Now, this is key right here, and you probably remember seeing this on the video, but within 12 seconds of the impact, the aircraft makes a slight left turn with a bank angle of about 20 degrees to precisely strike the building. Had the aircraft not made that turn at exactly that moment with the correct angle of bank, the aircraft would have missed the building by 800 feet. And this is a maneuver that even the most experienced pilots in the world could not have performed at that speed. So the last person we profile on the page is Hani Hanjour. He was a Saudi Arabian hijacker, and he was piloting American Airlines Flight 77 that allegedly crashed the 757 into the Pentagon. He was 29, commercial rating. He impacted at 530 miles per hour. Now, I already described the maneuver
Dan, is this is radar? This is radar data.
Yes, that's radar data. Yeah, we're working with a guy that's a walking, talking encyclopedia of knowledge who the Freedom of Information Act has gotten a wealth of data on all these flight profiles. So we're taking it exactly from the radar data that was provided through the Freedom of Information Act. So we already talked about this maneuver being replicated in a simulator and not being able to perform by even the most highly experienced pilots. But because Hani Hanjour is really our target hijacker. We put a bunch of notes down there and I'll just glance over a few of them. He'd only trained in light Cessnas, never flown a jet aircraft before. In January 2001, he was going to Arizona. Actually, he came into the States in the mid-90s and trained and then went back to Saudi. Where did I say he was from again? Saudi Arabia. Yeah, he went back to Saudi Arabia. And he came back in January 2001. And the school he was going to, Arizona Jet Tech Flight School, they reported him to the FAA at least 5 times because his English was so inadequate he couldn't qualify for a commercial pilot's license. It took him 5 hours to complete an oral exam that normally lasts only 2 hours, and he failed an English class with a .26 grade point average, and the jet tech manager said he couldn't, quote, could not fly at all. So in August 2000...
Dan, on that point again, sorry, I have to
interrupt whenever you want, please.
Yeah, what's your view on the fact that I guess it must be hard to get good help these days when you're running these intelligence operations on the lowdown. Why the hell would you send a bunch of inept nincompoops and they appear a bunch of chuckleheads? If you look at them, they look like a bunch of moronic, drug-addicted, alcohol-swilling, alleged Muslims from... What, that's the best you got? Now, is this just one of those unfortunate, in terms of the CIA isn't doing this. Is not an intelligence operation. This is a private Rothschild intelligence operation, running those Rothschild City of London networks through whether it's Israeli intelligence, into Saudi intelligence, into US intelligence. Remember, these are private little groups, little groups of social contacts, sometimes involved with secret societies, whether you want to believe Skull and Bones or throw some names out there, some sort of Masonic organization, whatever, Muslim Brotherhood, whatever. But I'm just surprised that the only people they can recruit are a bunch of idiots. Now, I guess that could be explained by the small scale of the operation, that they are actually maybe well funded, but they're very small scale. And they have probably have to get people out of jail for pedophilia and drug addicts like Bukhtari, the big bad boogeyman next to Osama bin Laden, who was running around Iraq, setting Iraq on fire. He was a pimp and a drug trafficker in jail in Jordan. So I guess that's where they recruit these clowns from. They're all alcohol and drug addicts. But, you know, you've got passports being thrown into rubble. It's almost amateur hour. Do you think it's just very briefly, because I'm curious, it always seems a bunch of chuckleheads. They throw passports into the rubble. Are they having a laugh at us? I mean, when you look at the specifics, is this a joke? Is it like April Fool's Day for them every day?
Well, listen what the general public fell for. I contend that 99.999% of the global population fell for this story because they're not pilots. They cannot conceive of the absurdity of the notion that these poorly trained pilots flew the aircraft. And if you go one step farther, they were recruited by Osama bin Laden, who was in a cave 8,000 miles away with a laptop and a cell phone, and he was able to command these pilots to take control of these 4 aircraft, avoiding the most sophisticated air defense system in the world for 1 hour and driving them into buildings. Now, that's the official story that the global population has fallen for, and that's why we're just focusing on the pilots, because we've heard, I have, and other people have, we've heard that there were no planes, they were using holograms, that a missile hit the Pentagon, that there was a flyover the Pentagon with another airplane that dropped a weapon on the plane.
Don't forget the suitcase nuke, Dan, and the aliens.
Right.
Don't forget the aliens.
So we're ignoring all that, just focusing
joke,
on
everyone. Yeah, and Dan, just on that point, as I said in the introduction, what we're trying to do is there's these specifics, which a lot of people say, yeah, we know it's done to death. Yes, but we need the legal specific side. We're mounting an investigation, so to speak. So we got the specifics, but what we're doing, as you'll hear in the next hour, in the second part, with Dan, we're combining my specialty with Dan's specialty. Dan has the specialty of the specifics of flight and the specifics of the impossibility, and getting on board more professional people above the grassroots. And we do appreciate the grassroots, but we need professionals that we can push forward in various roles. But we then need to combine the specifics and this little tactical thing with the grand chessboard, which is why this took place. And people say, oh, it was for oil, it was for the Eau-de-Guénon plan. Yes, we need to get the vernacular of everybody should know what the Eau-de-Guénon plan is, which was an Israeli plan put forward. Thank God for, was it Israel Shamir or Professor Israel Shahak? No, it was Professor Israel Shahak who first translated. God bless Dr. Israel Shahak, born and bred in Israel, I believe. Was he born and bred? But anyway, Israeli citizen, Jewish, who has not only written brilliant books such as Jewish History, Jewish Religion, The Weight of 3,000 Years on the Talmud, but this man, this amazing man, translated the Eau-de-Guénon plan, which showed that the Israeli General Staff said we need to break up all these Arab states, destroy pan-Arab nationalism, which went from Libya all the way through the Arab states, Syria and Iraq and Jordan and Egypt, and also into Iran. So we can create greater Israel, and as we know, they can cooperate with Russia and China on building the Pan-Eurasian superstate and the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, we're not going to go into this now, but we're just trying to get across. Yes, we're rehashing 9/11. Yes, we're looking at specifics, but we're also combining, and I believe it's quite a lethal combination, and I hope not for us, but with Captain Dan and Tim and others, we're now going to combine that into that big picture. So we get a pilot in, someone in the military in the door out of interest due to their specialty, and then we hit them with the facts and figures on Israel, the Eau-de-Guénon plan, Greater Israel. Israel is a cyber technology juggernaut, and we're going to talk about Dov Zakheim, which is the lead into the second part. Dov Zakheim, the Pentagon, and the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot. We just wanted to point that out for a lot of people who are probably thinking, we've done this. Can we move on? No, we need to keep this in our heads, and then we need to put it in the context of this grand geostrategic plan. Back to you, Dan. Sorry to interrupt, but I thought that was important.
No, that is important. So going on with these notes, in August 2001, now mind you, this is just 1 month prior to 9/11, Hanjer wanted to begin making cross-country flights to test security, and he supposedly tried to rent a plane from Freeway Airport in Maryland. They declined. They wouldn't allow him to even rent a Cessna 172 because he exhibited difficulty in controlling and landing this single-engine airplane. According to the 9/11 Commission, now this should be legitimate, Hanjer began his training in earnest, but in reality, while he's at flight school, he never finished the coursework required to get a certificate to be able to fly a single-engine aircraft. The New York Times reported that he was a lackadaisical student who often cut class and never displayed the passion so common among budding commercial airline pilots. I'm quoting these. ABC reported that when he returned to flight school, he was trying for his private pilot's license, but according to one of his instructors, he was a very poor student who skipped homework and missed flights. The school's attorney said that when Hanjer reapplied later in 2000, we declined to provide him training because he didn't think he was a good enough student when he was there in 1996 and 97. The school's owner described him as a weak student who was wasting our resources. He said that one of the first accomplishments of someone in flight school is to fly a plane without an instructor. And finally, the Chicago Tribune reported that at the school, a flight instructor said that Hanjer left an impression of being unimpressive. He is making weak progress, and that came from the president of the school. So in a nutshell, those are the three hijackers we're focusing on, in particular Hani Hanjour. And that's about all that's on that page. And then the next page is a friend of mine that I've known since 2006. Some of you may have heard of him. His name is Captain. Now, I had a big email system before Twitter and Facebook and all these social media platforms took off, called Whistleblowing Airline Employees Association. It was an email network. And Phil caught wind of my grounding in 2003. This was 2006. And he called me, and he was a DC-10 captain at Northwest Airlines. And he retired 9 years early because of his exposure of illegal modifications on Boeing aircraft, so that he could serve as an expert witness in future litigation. At the time, Northwest Airlines, the airline
Can we just
pilot,
stop, Dan? I need to stop you just to let people know.
Yeah.
Connell had enough sense to know that if he took this subject up, they were going to go after him. And correct me if I'm wrong, what they did to you, they tried to stick you through a psychiatric assessment.
Right.
And then ground you and then say you're no longer an expert witness. But am I correct in saying that was smart enough to go, well, I'll retire first, so you can't ground me? Is that correct?
He called me and said, "Mr. Hansack, my name's Danfield. What's up?" And he starts explaining to me right where he was, and he was right at the point where those three organizations, Northwest and the Airline Pilots Association, the FAA, were attempting to force him to see this notorious FAA psychiatrist, Dr. James Elliott, in Los Angeles, in an attempt to ground him for life as a pilot on psychological grounds. And I said, "Field, don't go, it's a setup." And I explained to him what happened, and it was either the next day or 2 days later he put in for an early retirement. Now, I lost about $4 million with what they did to me. He lost about the same amount of money because we had to retire early and we lost it all in pay, pension, and stock. But he continued his investigation after he retired into these illegal modification of the existence of this uninterruptible autopilot prior to 9/11 and the Malaysian Air 370 disasters. I'll give you a little bit of background about the real. But backing up a bit, in December 2006, goes into a courtroom pro se, representing himself, with a federal lawsuit regarding this modification on the aircraft to the FAA, Northwest Airlines, the FBI, NORAD, the U.S. Naval Academy superintendent. But the Department of Justice silenced due to his inadvertent opening of the safety issue, and the judge tossed the case. But it should be noted that in June 2006, there was a settlement of $615 million paid by Boeing to the United States Department of Justice. So his case was tossed, and we got a video down there with. The next page is the meat of the subject here, and that's remote controlled aircraft. So most people say, "Oh, come on, you can't not remotely control a large airplane." Well, we give you a big surprise on this page, because remote controlled aircraft technology has existed as far as back as over 75 years ago in 1944, and actually it goes beyond that, and we only cite a few examples here of remote controlled aircraft. So in 1944, towards the end of World War II, the U.S. military launched an Operation Aphrodite. What they did was got out old B-24s and PBY-4s to lessen the weight of the aircraft, and then they loaded them up with 30,000 pounds of Torpex, which is a highly incendiary compound. Now, you'll see in this short video that we have down below that pilots were required to make the takeoff, but once they got airborne, they bail out. They parachute out of the aircraft while the aircraft was high overhead.
Hey Dan, who flew one of those and died? Was that Kennedy or something? A brother?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there's a short video down there, and that's exactly what we Joe Kennedy, John Kennedy's older brother. What happened was he made the takeoff, but the aircraft blew up before he was able to bail out of the airplane. So there's a short 5-minute video clip down there describing that in 1944 they were remotely controlling airplanes. Now you jump ahead 40 years to 1984, due to rapidly advancing technology, the FAA and NASA conducted a joint crash test experiment in a remote location, and what they were doing was they wanted to test crew and passenger survivability in the event of an aircraft crash landing. They used a large 4-engine jet aircraft, a B-720. They didn't have any pilots or passengers on board. The aircraft was remotely guided to take off. They flew around the traffic pattern 6 times, auto-landing it every time before they intentionally crash landed the aircraft. We got a picture of how big the Boeing 720 aircraft is, and we have a real short film clip showing the aircraft actually coming in for the final crash landing. You'll notice that the wings are tipping left or right, but they intentionally crash landed the airplane. That was being remotely controlled. Now, jump ahead 2 decades to the mid-1990s. This system was developed and produced called the Uninterruptible Autopilot. Now, the design purpose of this system was to prevent would-be hijackers from commandeering a commercial jet aircraft in flight by remotely taking control of the aircraft autopilot and flight navigation system and routing to an airport where a safe auto landing could be made. Now, this is important here. Once this system is engaged remotely, the pilots can't disconnect the autopilot or navigation system by any means, and they're along for the ride. Now, one way of engaging an autopilot is just push a switch in the center panel and it turns it on. There's 4 ways of disengaging it. Push that switch again, or there's a red button on the yoke or the steering wheel, we call it as pilots. Press that, that'll disengage it. You apply a 70-pound force on the yoke, trying to override the autopilot, that'll disengage. And the last thing is pulling the circuit breaker on the system. Well, once this remote system takes control of the aircraft, none of those work. You can't disconnect the system. You're along for the ride. And that's what we allege occurred on 9/11. Now, does this system really exist? Yes. Proof is given by a Wikipedia article we link you to there with a picture of Boeing, Honeywell, Uninterruptible Autopilot. And if you just Google Uninterruptible Autopilot, and the first thing that pops up is this LinkedIn article. And it states, it's sort of misleading because it says Boeing stated patented system in 2006, and I've had people come back to me and say, look, it wasn't developed till 2006. Well, we got proof otherwise. It may be true. There's very strong evidence to prove that it was developed and produced in the mid-90s prior to 9/11, excuse me. And it's given by...
Dan,
Yes?
I hate to interrupt you, but I have to interrupt on this point.
Okay.
To anyone that says, well, where's the evidence? Where's the presidential sign form which says we have uninterruptible autopilots? Please extrapolate using your own mind. It's called your head and brain cells. They're up here. If you're flying automated bombs, was it B-29s, B-24s in the Second World War?
Yeah.
B-24s on automatic pilot in the 1940s, I'm sure you can extrapolate that they can run uninterruptible autopilots in the 1990s. And I always use this point. The American Air Force under Skunk Works and Mr. Kelly at Skunk Works at Lockheed developed the all-titanium turbo ramjet miracle aircraft, the SR-71 Blackbird or Habu, in 1963. So we can all look at a piece of information, and if that is true, then this is also true, or at least very possible. So even if we don't have the smoking gun proof, I think we can all use our brains and say if you can have a B-24 automatic flying bomb in the 1940s, in 2001, you can have a fully automated commercial aircraft. Sorry, Dan, I just wanted to make that point.
Oh, that's a very good point, Brendon. But what we've got on the website here, there's this grassroots group I mentioned before, Pilots for 9/11 Truth. We've got a link here. It's an MP3 audio only, but co-founder Rob Balsamo interviews Wayne Anderson, who was a seasoned avionics technician, and he admits during 95, 96 time frame that he actually worked on this system. They were on the ground testing the autopilot system on the aircraft, doing a bench test on it, and there was a gentleman that they didn't know who he was in the maintenance control room with a laptop, and they tried to pull every circuit breaker on the airplane, and they couldn't disconnect this system. So somehow it was backdoored, bypassing the normal methods of disconnecting the autopilot. So we're going to talk about Dov Zakheim here shortly, but we got a video on him, and we've got a James Corbett video on uninterruptible autopilots, and also an interview by Christopher Boleyn, who all describe in detail the system. So yes, it does exist. Yes, we attest that it was used on 9/11. And there's one page we can get to last, but we've got a page that's going to be entitled Israel, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But our group is working with a number of groups, including Pilots for 9/11 Truth, the Truth Action Project, the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry I mentioned before, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and then the firemen have a group called Justice for 9/11 Heroes, and they're also hopefully testifying before the grand jury. I Am the Face of Truth, that's a Facebook group, and Scientists for 9/11 Truth. So we've got a lot of affiliates we're working with, and we're getting a lot of information from them as well. But the second last page that'll be on here is our national motto, and it's for those of you who aren't American and don't know what it is, it's in God we trust. And we said America is based on the religious beliefs of our founding fathers, and it's essentially a Christian nation established on Christian principles. But we claim, as a consequence of the lies of 9/11 resulting in the illegal and unwarranted invasions of foreign countries that followed, which killed, maimed, or displaced millions of Muslims and others worldwide, America has degenerated into anything but a Christian nation. And we say, is this the America you grew up in? So we got a nice Christian song there you can listen to. So in essence, except for Russia.
So Dan, just to sum up, so the bottom line is we can extrapolate and think for ourselves, and we have a smoking gun. Is that correct? We actually have a smoking gun, which shows the automatic flying system was in place in the 1990s, or at least being tested in the mid 1990s. Is that a good summary?
That is a good summary. And we also are going to have experienced pilots come in over the top of me and say they couldn't have done it themselves. So that's what they'd be testing.
And so, what was the name of the gentleman? Just to sum up again, the gentleman who was doing the testing in the mid 1990s.
Oh, Wayne Anderson. He was an avionics technician. So
right.
So anyhow,
and could I just want to add in too? A lot of the aircraft modifications. One of the theories was that the aircraft that were flying into the World Trade Centers were actually modified KC-130 tankers or something, and there was, and just to extrapolate on that briefly, Dan, because Israel do a lot of aircraft modifications. In fact, they specialize in it, and I'll put up some links now so people can see videos and stuff of Israel bragging, because they're always bragging, how they do specialized modifications, make aircraft into air cargo aircraft and things like that. But what I'm interested in is Israel is a bunker. Israel is a very closed society. It's a place where you can go and do secret stuff. It's a place where you can develop things. It's like the current coronavirus. People are saying Fort Detrick. Well, fine, but there's actually regular inspections of Fort Detrick. It's under specified treaties to do with germ warfare and so on. But in places like Israel and China and other places, there is no oversight. And these people specialize in virology. So they also specialize in things like aircraft modification. As I keep trying to tell people, Israel is a bunker where you can do your secret stuff very, very easily. Now, the smoking gun is they admit freely they do aircraft modifications. And the question I want to briefly touch on with you is, what's your opinion on the assertion that I must admit, when I look at the footage, it does not look like a commercial airline. It looks like it doesn't have windows. Do you think it could have been some sort of modified tanker aircraft?
Well, we can get into that when we talk about Dov Zakheim, because that's exactly what we have surmised from information we've got on Zakheim, in that he did contract. I can get into it when we talk about Dov Zakheim and what he did with at least 32 767s. But that was, other than the donate page on our website. We're not money grubbers looking for money, a lot of money here. As a matter of fact, we're not. I don't want people to get that impression looking at it, but actually,
Dan, can I just say for people on the record, I lost my $80,000 a year job I was going back to as a comprehensive registered nurse. I was ICU trained, emergency department, acute care settings. You lost you're making a lot of money. We've lost everything. We just want enough to live, and then to maximize gains to get stuff done. So just to know, we have sacrificed. We're not out to pay for our prostitutes or something in our casinos, because you always get some clowns that will run around saying they're in it for the money. But just so people understand, this is about paying our bills and just about getting stuff so we can pay for website design, we can pay for maybe a social media manager, and all the basics. We're just asking for the basics, and whatever's on top, we want to fix this problem. Look, I think we all understand now that there's a lot happening this year and next year. If you watch my videos, particularly video 22, it's pretty much we're at a major tipping point. And pretty soon, and we're hoping the pilots and the military people are watching, you get it. You're getting to the point where you may have nothing to lose. So, you know what, Dan, why don't we round up part one of this possibly 3-part series?
Okay.
And why don't we have a quick break?
Israel?
Oh, no, we're going to talk about it, my friend. We will be talking about Israel and Dov Zakheim. But
I thought you'd be a little shy about it, Brendon.
No, of course.
I'm only kidding.
But what we'll do is we'll take a little break, and let's go to part two, in particular of Dan, as Dan talks about Dov Zakheim, the dual national Israeli-American citizen, friends with the other dual national Israeli-American citizen, Michael Chertoff, formerly head of Department of Homeland Security and now a private contractor, I do believe, to the NSA, gathering data on Americans, if that's not bad enough. We're going to now tie in the Pentagon, Israel, dual national citizens, and then when I come on board with my information, we're going to tie that all into the grand strategy. Thanks, Dan. Let's come back for part 2.
Okay.
Okay.
Cyber is a real domain.